context, and it really comes down to your viral load. So it doesn't matter how long you've known the person or what your relationship history is like with them. Again, it's down to your viral load. So if your viral load is below 200 and you've been on medication consistently for at least 6 months, there's no obligation to disclose your status in any form of sexual context. Doesn't matter what kind of sex you're having, protected, unprotected. If your viral load is below 200 and you're on meds, you never have to disclose. If it's between 200 and 1500 and you use a condom properly, then you don't have to disclose. If it's unprotected sex or condom breaks, you do. And if it's above 1500, then you never have to, then you always have to disclose your status. And then outside of a sexual context, it's really up to you when you disclose. The only exceptions to that is there's very few work exceptions, like the Army requires it. And if you're in a particularly high risk job where there's the only one I can think of is if you're like a bare knuckle boxer, where there's blood transmission, then technically that one you have to disclose.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And if you're going into a particularly high risk surgery, you may have to, but if you're ever in a situation where you think, oh, this might have blood to blood transmission, you can always call HALCO or another HIV organization to confirm. But by and large, outside of a sexual context, you don't have to disclose your status, and even in a sexual context, it's only sometimes.
Okay. Can an individual be legally penalized for not disclosing the HIV status to a partner? How does this vary depending on the type of relationship, whether casual versus long-term?
So yes, you can. So again, if you don't disclose to a partner before having sex when you are legally required to, so if you're in that, your viral load's above 1500 or you're in that window of 200 to 1500 and you don't use a condom properly, you can be charged with non-disclosure. Non-disclosure is not an actual charge in the criminal code. Like if you open it, you're not going to find HIV non-disclosure in there. So what they've done is they've shoved it under aggravated sexual assault, which is a very serious crime in Canada. It usually comes with a penitentiary sentence. And you'd be charged under that. Second half of that question, it doesn't matter again how long you've known this person or if you're in a multi-year relationship or not. If that legal obligation to disclose based off your viral load exists and you don't disclose, you can be charged under aggravated sexual assault.
Okay. If someone is living with HIV and does not feel comfortable disclosing their status to a healthcare provider or potential partner, what are their rights?
So again, with a healthcare provider, you don't have to. It's really up to you. It's usually recommended because it might affect the decisions that they're making in regards to your health, especially with medications they're prescribing if you're already on meds. But generally, you don't have to. Same with dentists, acupuncturists. Healthcare providers are expected to follow universal precautions to prevent any kind of transmission, whether it's HIV or other bloodborne infections. Again, this is different if you're going into a particularly high risk surgery or something where there's a risk of needle poke, or if you're informed after a procedure that there was an incident where there was a needle prick and the doctor's blood may have mingled with yours, then you would want to speak with a lawyer. Sorry, what was the other part of the question?
What are their rights?
Yeah. So just generally, you have the right to privacy in most situations outside of this very specific viral load with sexual partners. Otherwise, you have a right to privacy of your health information.
Okay. Are there any legal protections for 2S LGBTQ plus individuals with HIV regarding employment discrimination if their HIV status becomes known?
Yeah, your HIV status should not affect your employment in any way. Your employers, again, outside of very unique contexts, like the Army is a bit different, your employer doesn't need to know your status, and if your employer finds out your status, it should have no impact on them. HIV is considered a disability under the Human Rights Code, so if there is any sort of discrimination or adverse treatment, that's a human rights claim. That also could be an employment law question. But they are not allowed to treat you any differently. They're not allowed to disclose your status to others in the workplace. And if they do, you have not legal obligations. You have legal rights. There's civil action you can take against them to prevent them from continuing to do this and to get some reparation for the harm stuff.
Okay. In cases where a person is unknowingly exposed to HIV due to lack of disclosure, what legal recourse is available?
Yeah, so there's a few. So if you're with someone and they knowingly transmit HIV to you, there's a few options. The first is public health. If you test positive for HIV, public health will contact you. And they'll do contact tracing, and they'll kind of ask about how you may have contracted it. And if you're concerned that your partner gave it to you and they maybe deliberately did it, or they withheld their status knowing that they could transmit, public health actually has powers. They have the ability to issue orders, sort of like a criminal law aspect. Like they have the ability to force someone to disclose in the future or face criminal punishment. So that's always an option. There's also civil rights, civil law. You can sue someone. And then always, if you think that they knew they had HIV and weren't taking their medications and transmitted it, or that they ought to have known and didn't disclose to you, you can always report to police as well, because it is a criminal charge. In that situation, I'd recommend reaching out to HALCO first, or Legal Aid Ontario offers up to 4 hours of free legal advice for victims of sexual violence. There does not need to be any kind of police information made. You don't have to have spoken with anyone about it to get access to these services, but they are lawyers who are trained in victims' rights. We have a few that we work with that specifically deal with HIV transmission, that are very sensitive to the issue, and they can provide free advice for you on how to navigate that situation.
Okay. What advice will you give to someone in the Toulouse LGBTQ+ community who is hesitant to disclose their HIV status, either due to fear of legal issues or because they worry about stigma and discrimination?
Yeah, I would say that, again, by and large, you don't have to tell people your status. It's up to you. It's, even in a sexual context, as long as you are up to date with your health, you get regular viral load checks, and you're taking your medications, and you know you are below that threshold where you have to disclose, it's no one's business. If you don't want to tell them, you don't have to, even if you're in a long-term committed relationship. There's always risk someone might find out and panic, even if there was no obligation on you. That does unfortunately happen. But as long as you're taking care of your health and you're aware that you don't have a duty to disclose, no consequences should happen from it. There should be no legal fallout. And there's organizations like HALCO that can assist if this ever does occur. But by and large, just keep up to date on your health and you don't have to worry. And if you do decide to disclose to someone, there's lots of organizations, Black Cap, there's HALCO, there's the Legal Network, there's lots of aid service organizations out there with people who do care, who can maybe help facilitate that process or provide supports.
That's my questions.